We're going to start today's daf is Pei Bet 82. The Mishnah right on the top of Amud Aleph, which is a famous sugya, very difficult and complicated, and it's a very short piece, relatively speaking, in terms of size, but it's a challenging one. The Mishnah says, "Hatinokot en me'anin otan b'yom kippurim." We don't afflict the children on Yom Kippur, meaning children do not have to fast on Yom Kippur. Rashi says, "En hayavin limno mehen ma'achal." You don't have to withhold from them food. Other Mefarshim say it's actually you're not allowed to. They're not allowed to fast. Aval mechanechin otan lifnei shana v'lifnei shanatayim. But we should train them a year before or 2 years before. That's literally what it says. Lifnei shana v'lifnei shanatayim. We're going to see this is important. Bishvil sheyu regilin b'mitzvot, so that they will be accustomed to doing the mitzvah. Now Rashi explains here something which becomes complex in the ensuing Gemara. But basically what you have to keep in mind is that when we're talking about ages, we're talking about the amount of years that have already transpired. Okay, so we'll see how this plays out. So the Gemara's first question is, what does the Mishnah mean? We train them a year or 2 years before. Which is it? Is it 2 years or a year? Which one? So Amar Rav Chesda says, it depends. If the child is a sickly child, he or she can't handle too much strain. So we only train them 1 year in advance. If the child is stronger, then we train them 2 years in advance.
Maybe it's a bar mitzvah.
Now wait, we're going to see. 2 years in advance of what? Right? 2 years in advance of what? Is the question, right? So that's why I left that purposely open, because if you read the Rashi, he confuses you from the beginning of the Mishnah by talking about what the Gemara is going to say. So I'm not going to tell you. All right? So far we know that there's something that's variable. It could be 1 year or it could be 2 years. But 1 or 2 years before what? Before bar mitzvah? Before what? So the Gemara, now we see. Amar Rafuna says, Ben chet u ben tet mechanechin otan l'sha'ot. When the child is 8 or 9 years old, meaning they've completed their 8th or 9th year, okay? So they're in their 10th year, right? 8th or 9th year is complete. We train them l'sha'ot. The sha'ot means that, let's say they normally have breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning. Give it to them at 9 o'clock. Let's say they normally have breakfast at 8 o'clock. Give it to them at 10 o'clock. In other words, you give it to them a little bit later so that they feel that it's different, but they're not suffering too much. A kid can wait an hour and 2 hours. It doesn't have to be, it's not that bad. Okay, then Ben Yud u Ben Yud Aleph, when the child is 10 or 11. Okay, so they've completed 10 years, they've completed 11 years of life. Mashlimin midrabanan. They have to complete the fast, but it's only rabbinic. They're not really bar bat mitzvah yet. Ben Yud Bet Mashlimin mideoraita. Once they're 12, they have to complete the fast from the Torah. And that is betinoket. Obviously that's speaking about a girl. Okay, so when the girl is 9 or 10, this is a simple way of reading it. Rashi it makes it a little bit more complicated, the way that he expresses it with the 3 years and the 2 years. So according to this, how is the Mishnah being read? In other words, so according to Rav Huna, when the Mishnah says we start them 1 year before or 2 years before, it means 1 or 2 years before they are finishing the fast, because they're actually finishing the fast. Well, the girl is finishing the fast already when she is 11 years old, right? When she's 11 years old, she's finishing the fast. But 2 years before that, when she's 10 years and 9 years old, she has to do a partial fast, okay? So what is that? There's actually 4 years of training before the bat mitzvah, okay? There's 10 years old, and there's 9 years old, there's 10 years old, there's 3. 9 years old, 10 years old, 11 years old. So 9 and 10, she's only doing a partial fast. 11 years old, she does the full fast, but it's only midrabanan. 12 years old, she does the fast. Obviously, she's bat mitzvah. Okay? That's what Rav Huna says. So when he reads the Mishnah is talking about the 1 or 2 years before she's 11. Before she's 11. Because when she's 11, she has to finish the fast rabbinically as a as practice. But when she's 10 and 9, that's what the Mishnah is saying. Either starting when she's 10, or when she's 9, if she's strong enough, she starts when she's 9, having breakfast a little bit later than she normally would in the morning. That's what Rav Huna says. Okay? Now, Rav Nachman Amar ben Tet ben Yud mechanechinotan l'sha'ot. Rav Nachman says when the child is 9 or 10, that's when the child delays breakfast. Ben Yud Aleph ben Yud Bet mashlimin midrabanan. When he's 11 or 12, then he has to complete the fast rabbinically. Ben Yud Gimel mashlimin mideoraita batinok. This is talking about a boy. In other words, for a boy, there is one additional year sandwiched in there, right? Because for the girl, she starts at 8, so she has 8 and 9, where she's doing a partial fast. Okay, when she's 8, when she's 9, she's partial fast. When she's 10 and she's 11, she does a full fast, but it's rabbinic. That's what Rav Huna said. Rav Nachman is pushing it forward a year. When the child is 9 or 10, he has a partial fast. When he's 11 and 12, he has a full fast, but it's only rabbinic. So according to both of them, there's 4 years of practice. 4 years of practice. I made a mistake before. I skipped one of them. Okay? 4 years of practice, not 3. For the girl, it starts at 8 years old. So it's 8 and 9 years old, partial fast. I said 9 before. I made a mistake. 8 or 9 years old, partial fast. 10 and 11, full fast, but it's only rabbinic. 12, she's biblically obligated. For the boy, he can wait a year later because his biblical fast is not till he's 13. So he says 9 and 10, partial fast. 11 and 12, full fast, but it's only rabbinic. And then when he's 13, he has the full requirement, okay? Min HaTorah. So what is the significance here? So according to them, they are understanding the Mishnah, again, as talking about the years before they complete the fast. So for the boy, that means when he's 9 and 10. For the girl, when she's 8 and 9. That's what the Mishnah was talking about when it said you train them a year or 2 years before. Meaning a year or 2 years before they finish the fast, even though that finishing is only rabbinic. That's the way that Rashi is reading this whole sugya. We're following what Rashi says here. Now, that's for Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan comes along and says, Hashlama d'Rabbanan leka. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, I disagree. There's never a time where a child has to finish the fast mid'Rabbanan. Ben Yud Aleph mechanechinoto l'sha'ot. Ben Yud Bet mashlimin mideoraita. For the girl, when she's 10 or 11, she does a partial fast. When she's 12, she does the whole thing from the Torah. And for a boy, it would be the same, except you would say when he's 11 and 12, he does a partial fast. When he is 13, he has to do it min Torah. So Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Rav Huna and Rav Nachman both agree that there are 2 years where the child does a full fast prior to being required. Okay? Rabbinically. Right? For the girl, it's when she's 10 and 11. For the boy, it's when he's 11 and 12. He's rabbinically required to complete the fast, according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman. But Rabbi Yochanan says, I disagree. There's no such thing as finishing the fast rabbinically. Either you're doing a partial fast, or you're bar bat mitzvah. Okay? There's no finishing, completing the fast when you're not required.
It's a 2-year rabbinic?
Yeah, both Rav Huna and Rav Nachman are both saying that 2 years before the actual requirement, you have to fast the complete fast. So for a boy, 11 and 12. For the girl, 10 and 11. Prior to that, there are 1 or 2 years, depending on the health of the child, that you would.
So that's the 4 years.
Have to do the partial. Right. So they have a 4-year window in total. That's the way that they understand it. But definitely, there's always those 2 years of completing the fast before actually being required, according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman. The question is about those prior years. Okay, in other words, from if the child is sick, in other words, then the years are going to change. So Rashi says on the side, why does it say when he's 8 or 9 for the girl, when she's 8 or 9? If she's healthy, she starts when she's 8 doing the partial fast. If she's sick, then she starts when she's 9. Okay? But still, we have those 2 years that the child is going to complete the fast before actually starting. Okay, as Rashi says, but that's going to be equal. At least that seems to be the way that Rashi is interpreting it. Okay, now, but Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. He says that the 1 or 2 years before the fast is talking about before bar mitzvah, or before bat mitzvah. There's no completing of the fast before your bar bat mitzvah, according to Rabbi Yochanan.
That would just a 2-year.
That would just be a 1 or 2 year pre-training.
Okay.
Right. So now, So now the Gemara asks as follows. Tanan, it says in the Mishnah, it says in the Mishnah that we don't torture, we don't afflict the children on Yom Kippur. We train them a year before or 2 years before. In other words, according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, we understand what they mean. What it means is that you train them, meaning you do a partial fasting with them, either a year before they have to do the full fast, rabbinically, meaning when the girl is 9, or 2 years before she has to do the full fast, rabbinically, which is when she's 8. For a boy, either when he's 11, okay, which is a year before, either when he's 10, which is a year before he has to start completing the fast rabbinically, or when he's 9, which is 2 years before he has to start completing the fast rabbinically. That's the way that Rav Nachman and Rav Huna will understand our Mishnah when it says 1 year before or 2 years before. That's the variable. The variable is those years that we do a partial fasting. That if you're weak, you only have to do one of those. If you're strong, you do 2 of those. Ela Rabbi Yochanan kashya, but what about according to Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan, how is he going to read our Mishnah? Amar lach Rabbi Yochanan, ma'ishana ushtayim, samuch lepirkan. It doesn't mean 1 or 2 years. It means 1 or 2 years before bar bat mitzvah. Not 1 or 2 years before they start doing a rabbinic completion of the fast, but 1 or 2 years before they actually start observing the fast. That's all he's going to say. So he's going to say our Mishnah is talking about, for a girl, the years 10 and 11, when she's 10 and when she's 11. For a boy, the years 11 and 12. That's what it means. And in both of those years, according to Rabbi Yochanan, they don't have to complete the fast. They only have to practice doing part of the fast. The Hagaot Agra, on the side, makes this very clear. He explains it nicely. He says that דלפי זה הפירוש למתניתין, אבל מחנכים אותם לפני שנה אינו קיים להתחלת הזמן של החינוך, אלא קיים להמשכת זמן. In other words, according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, when it talks about 1 year or 2 years, it's not talking about when to start. It's talking about how much time. In other words, there's either a 1 year period where they do a practice fasting where they don't complete, or there's a 2 year period. Whereas according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's actually telling you when to start. Either a year before Bar Bat Mitzvah or 2 years before Bar Bat Mitzvah. That's the machloket. Is it telling you a period of time, but actually that period of time is a couple of years before Bar Bat Mitzvah, not right before. Okay, that's what Rav Huna and Rav Nachman are saying. They're saying that there are 2 phases. There are 1 or 2 years of partial fasting, 2 years of full fasting for practice, and then you get into Bar Bat Mitzvah. According to Rabbi Yochanan, no. There's 1 or 2 years of partial fasting, and then you jump right into the whole thing, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Now, the Gemara goes on. Tashma come in here. The Tani Rabbi Bar Shmuel said, that Rabbi Bar Shmuel said that children, you don't make them fast on Yom Kippur, but you train them a year or 2. Samuch lepirkan. Samuch lepirkan means before they actually start having to fast. You train them a year or 2 before. So what does this mean? That seems to contradict Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, because Rav Huna and Rav Nachman say that the whole process begins 4 years in advance, 3 or 4 years before, not 2 years before. And this is saying only 1 or 2 years before. So Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan Nicha, this makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that the earliest we ever impose anything on a child is when they are 10 years old for a girl, or 11 years old for a boy. So there's only a year or 2 prior to Bar Bat Mitzvah that we require them to do anything according to Rabbi Yochanan. But according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, that say that there were 3 or 4 years before Bar Bat Mitzvah that we really required the children to observe the fast, either partially or completely. So if that's the case, how do they explain what Rabbi Bar Shmuel says, that the Braita that Rabbi Bar Shmuel quotes, that says that there's only a year or 2 before Bar Bat Mitzvah that they have to observe the fast? How are they going to explain that? They'll say, Amri lach Rabbanan, Mai chinuch nami de katane hashlama. So they will answer you that what does it mean when it says that a year or 2 before they have to, we train them? That means completing the fast. In other words, when Rabbi Bar Shmuel said there's a year or 2 before that we train them, what he meant was completing the fast, meaning that a girl, either when she's 11 or 10, has to complete the fast. A boy, when he's either 12 or 11, has to complete the fast. But prior to that, there's another year or 2 that they also have to do a partial fast. Okay, so now this is refining things a little bit, because that means that according to Rav Nachman and Rav Huna, even those last 2 years before Bar Bat Mitzvah is variable. That's variable. Because it's saying that if the child is weak, even according to Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, that they say that when the girl is 11, when the boy is 12, they definitely have to complete the fast rabbinically that year before they get to their bar bat mitzvah. Even according to that previous year where the girl is 10 or the boy is 11, that year it depends if the child is weak or strong. Because originally we said only years 9 and 10 for the boy. Year 8 and 9 for the girl is subject to how weak or strong she is, or he is. But now we're saying that even that the last 2 years before bar bat mitzvah, it depends. It'll only be 1 year if the child is weak. It will be 2 years if the child is strong. Okay? So, and that's how they're going to explain it. So there could be as little as, for a weak child, as little as, let's say, 3 years of practice, because you would have, when the boy is 10, he'll start doing a partial fast. When he's 11, maybe he's not strong enough, so he'll only do also a partial fast. And then when he's 12, he'll do a full fast rabbinically. And if he's strong, then when he's 9 and 10, he'll do a partial fast. When he's 11 and 12, he'll do a full fast rabbinically. And then when he's 13, he will have the complete thing. That seems to be the way the Gemara is answering Rav Huna and Rav Nachman. But the question is, how can you say that when it tells us a year or two before bar mitzvah, there's that we're mechanechin, we train them, that it means finishing the fast? V'hatanya, we learned in a Braita, is a chinuch. What does it mean, chinuch? Haya ragil le'echol b'shtei sha'ot machilin oto l'shalosh, b'shalosh machilin oto ba'arba. We said that when it says chinuch, it means that if they normally eat 2 hours into the day, 8 o'clock, you feed them at 9. If they normally eat 9 o'clock, you feed them at 10, and so on. Right? So that means that when we say chinuch, we mean partial fasting. And it says a year before bar mitzvah or 2 years before bar mitzvah, mechanechin. We train them, meaning we only delay their breakfast. We don't make them complete the fast. That's like what Rabbi Yochanan says, that you never make them complete the fast before bar mitzvah. So what is the answer? The Gemara says that that Amar Rava Bar Ula, there are two concepts of chinuch. We use the term in two different ways. Sometimes when we use the word chinuch, we mean partial fasting. Sometimes when we use the word chinuch, we mean full fasting. So Rav Huna and Rav Nachman will say that the 2 years immediately prior to bar bat mitzvah, that's when we're doing chinuch in a full way. But 2 years before that, that's when we're doing chinuch in a partial way. Rabbi Yochanan will say, no, there's only 2 years before bar bat mitzvah respectively that we do any kind of training, and in both cases it's partial training. Now what is the actual halakha bottom line? The halakha bottom line is that basically we follow a variation on this. We follow really the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch interpretation of the sugya, but what it comes out is that we say that obviously for a girl she has to start min haTorah fasting at the age of 12, for a boy min haTorah at the age of 13, but we say that rabbinically everybody has to start no later than 11, which means for the girl she has to fast completely when she's 11. For a boy 11 and 12 he has to fast completely min midirabanan. So everybody, it makes it easier. Everyone is there's shivyon zechuyot. Everybody is equal when it comes to this. That they start at the age of 11 rabbinically fasting. The girl only ends up having to fast, to complete the fast 1 year prior to her actual bat mitzvah. The boy ends up having to fast, complete it 2 years prior to his bar mitzvah. They both start at the age of 11. And the 2 years prior to that is when they're going to begin partially fasting. That's what the halakha is that's brought in Shulchan Aruch. Partially fasting means we delay their breakfast an hour or two in the morning just to make them feel a little bit different on that day. The new Mishnah says, but that's a very complicated sugya because there's so many different interpretations of it and conclusions from it. Anyway, the Mishnah says, if a pregnant woman smells food and she starts to get ill from smelling the food, and we think she's going to be endangered, we feed her until she's relaxed. A sick person, we feed him according to the advice of the experts, like the doctors. And if there are no experts around, there are no doctors with whom to consult, that we're going to see the Gemara is going to revise this understanding, but what the plain meaning of the Mishnah is that if there are experts around, we rely on the experts. If there are no experts to tell us whether we need to feed this sick person, then if the sick person says, I need to eat or I'm going to die, I can't handle it, we feed them until they feel relaxed. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, a pregnant woman who smells holy meat, in other words, she smells the meat of the korbanot or the meat of pig, she smells pork, we take a piece with some sauce, okay? And and we put this sort of a taste of it, okay, on her lips. We take like a stick with the gravy. We take a piece of wood, a stick with the gravy from the meat that she smells, and we put it on her mouth so that she can feel it close to her and see if psychologically that will satisfy her. Okay? If that works, then fine, we're okay. But if not, we have to then we give her some of the gravy itself. And if that's enough, good. And if that doesn't work, then we have to feed her the actual shuman, the actual fat of the pork or of the Besar Kodesh. Because there's nothing that stands in the way of saving a life. And if this woman is endangered, her life is endangered, because she's smelling this food and she can't handle it, so her life is now in danger. So we violate any commandment. She can eat the korban, she can eat the pork, except for three things that we know. You cannot commit idolatry, you cannot worship idols in order to save your life, you're not allowed to kill another person, and you're not allowed to commit sexual immorality to save your life. Avodah zarah minalan, how do we know that you cannot save your life using idolatry? The Tanya, as it says in the Braita, Rabbi Eliezer Omerim, Ne'emar b'chol nafshecha, lama ne'emar b'chol me'odecha. Because Rabbi Eliezer says, it says in the Shema, b'chol levavecha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol me'odecha. If it says with all your soul, why does it say b'chol me'odecha, with all your might? Ne'emar b'chol me'odecha, lama ne'emar b'chol nafshecha. And if it says me'odecha, why does it have to say nafshecha? Because the Bach here amends the text, that what it should say is, Ella lomar lecha. It should say, Ella lomar lecha im yesh lecha adam, that if there's a person shegufo haviv alav mimamono, there are some people that their body is more important to them than their money. Such a person, that's why it says with all your soul, meaning with all of your physical energy, because some of them, because their body is more important to them than their money. Some people, their money is more important to them than their body. That person, that's why it says with all your might, which means with all your money. In other words, you should give everything that you have to Hashem. So it has to mention all of your physical resources, all of your material resources, all of your money, because different people relate to things differently. In other words, he has to give up his own bodily existence for the sake of Hashem. He has to give up his own all of his money for the sake of Hashem. That's what it means. The love of Hashem has to be so great that a person will sacrifice anything. And that means even if a person's life is in danger, he cannot worship idols in order to save himself. If some kind of idolatry is going to, in other words, if somebody holds a gun to his head and says, I'm going to kill you if you don't worship this idol, you're not allowed to worship the idol in order to save your life. And how do we know Gilui arayot ushvichat damim minalan? How do we know that you're not allowed to commit sexual immorality or to kill somebody in order to save your life? The Tanya says in the Braita, Rabbi Yomer Rabbi says ki kasher yakum ishal re'or tzach or nefesh kena davar hazeh, because it talks about a woman who's raped, and it says just like someone who rises upon his friend and kills him, so too is this thing. In other words, if the woman is raped, if the woman is a married woman is raped, it talks about how she's not liable, obviously, because she did not. She was anus. She was. It was against her will. She was a victim. We don't blame the victim. So the person who committed it, it's like killing somebody to rape them. That's what it says. So you don't blame the victim when someone's killed. You don't say, well, the victim, it's his fault. So you don't say that the woman, it was her fault. Okay, so it compares murder to gilui arayot and and what do we learn from a rotzeach lenaram orasa? What do we learn? What's the connection? What's the halachic connection between murder and a woman who is raped, the married woman who is raped? It comes to teach and it ends up learning. In other words, that just like if you see a man running after a woman to rape her, you're allowed to save her even by killing the perpetrator. You see somebody running after a woman to rape her, you're allowed to intervene even at the cost of the life of the person chasing after the victim. And and just like killing someone, you have to give up your life before killing someone else. So too, you have to give up your life before raping a woman, or in other words, committing any kind of sexual immorality, adultery, incest, and so on and so forth. So the connection is twofold. In other words, you can save the potential victim even by taking the life of the potential perpetrator. And if someone holds a gun to your head and says, rape this woman or kill this person, you give up your life rather than do doing it. And Virotzach Gufe Minalan. And how do we know that if somebody holds a gun to your head and says, kill this other person, that you have to give up your life before doing it? Svarahi. It's actually purely based on Svara. It's purely based on logic. Because that somebody came in front of it, should say Rabbah, and said, Amarli Mare Dorai Katale Leplanya. Vilo katil nalach. And so he came to Rabbah and he said, I have a moral dilemma. The governor, these people had absolute power. The master of my village told me, if I don't kill so-and-so, he's going to kill me. What do? I have a moral dilemma. Amar le niktelach velo tiktol. Rabbah said you have to let yourself be killed. You can't kill the person. Because my chazit de damad didach sumak tefe dilma demada ugavra sumak tefe. How do you know your blood is redder than his? That's a famous saying. It's a famous Talmudic saying. How do you know that your blood is redder than his blood? Maybe his blood is redder than yours. In other words, who are you to play God and decide whose life is worth more? Of course, the instinct of self-preservation is, of course, my life is worth more. But how can you be the one to judge that? Hahi ubara, there was a certain pregnant woman, the archa, that smelled something, and it was Yom Kippur. And she started having a tremendous desire. They came before Rabbi Amar, who he said to them, Zilu lachoshulad yomide kippureu. Go whisper in her ear, it's Yom Kippur, it's Yom Kippur. You don't want to eat now. So they did. Lachoshula ve'ilhisha. So it worked. They said, it's Yom Kippur, it's Yom Kippur. Oh, okay, right, you're right. I can't, I got to get my mind off the food, Right? She was able to relax. So Kareale, he said about her, the pasuk, Beter metzorcha babetin yidaticha. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Right? That's from Yirmiyahu. Remember the pasuk from Yirmiyahu. It's a Yirmiyahu Perek Aleph. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. In other words, this baby, the way that they're interpreting is this baby was a tzaddik. Because the baby is what causes the mother to have this tremendous desire to eat the fruit when she smelled it. But when you tell her it's Yom Kippur, the baby calmed down. So you see the baby is a tzaddik. And what happened? That mother, her child was Rabbi Yochanan. See that? Rabbi Yochanan was a tzaddik even when he was in his mother's belly. Now, a similar situation where a woman who was pregnant smelled some food and came before Rabbi Hanina. So they tried the same strategy of telling her it's Yom Kippur, it's Yom Kippur. It didn't work. Karei Alei said, that the wicked are thrown out from the womb. That's literally what it means. But they're saying zar. Rashi says, Na'asu zarim v'nakru l'aviyam shebashamayim, meaning even the wicked people, even when they're in their mother's womb, they're already alien to Hashem, meaning they're already on the outs with God. So telling him that it's Yom Kippur is not going to help. And what happened to that lady? Nefak mina Shabbatai atzar pere. A bad guy named Shabbatai came out of that woman, and he was called the one who stored up produce. Because what did he do? He would save up. He would stockpile fruit in order that when the prices, in other words, when there was a shortage, the prices would go up and he'd be able to make a lot of money. So it says in Rashi here, in order to raise the prices, because it says in a Braita, in Otzrin Perot Eretz Yisrael, you're not allowed to hoard fruit in Eretz Yisrael. Why not? Because you're taking advantage of the delicate economy, and that's interesting because that's a very non-capital. You have some capitalistic ideas, you have some more socialist ideas. It's definitely not a capitalistic concept, right? But why? You're not allowed to do that with anything that life depends on. Because you're raising the price, you're manipulating the market basically. So he would gather up all the produce he could, buy it all up for cheap, so there was nothing available, then the prices would skyrocket and he would take advantage of that. This was the son of this woman who even on Yom Kippur he didn't care when he was in his mother's womb, and therefore we see that to a certain extent the Chachamim saw it as a siman tov if a pregnant woman was able to make it through Yom Kippur, that she had a tzaddik inside, and if she wasn't able to, they saw it as somewhat of a negative sign that the child was, by its nature, perhaps had some leanings that weren't so good. That doesn't mean, obviously, that the child doesn't have free choice to become a tzaddik, but maybe that there's some natural proclivities there, like we know with Yaakov and Esav. Even inside the womb, they were already struggling with their differences, and so too with these two children, one of whom was Rabbi Yochanan, and one was this person who was a less savory individual. But all of this is very halacha l'maaseh. Everything in this parak is very practical. It deals with, things that are masim b'chol yom, things that every year you have to know these halachot of children, what age do they have to fast, partially and fully, and a pregnant woman and nursing women, and what are the requirements and what are the restrictions on their fasting on Yom Kippur and on other Taniyot. So it's very practical sugyot.